1. Set up. The tree's gnarled roots broke through the soft earth, curling around stones half buried in moss. Shadows from its wide branches dappled the ground, their coolness contrasting the late afternoon sun's warmth. The scent of blooming wildflowers mixed with the faint tang of damp earth, carried on a lazy breeze. A faint rustle in the grass added to the serene hum of crickets. Kira adjusted her green tunic, leaning forward over the wooden go-board she and Ilya had balanced on a tree root. Her hat drooped slightly, its brim hiding her sly grin. A small stone, smooth and round, was tucked snugly in the sleeve of her tunic. She moved her arm casually, pretending to scratch her nose, and dropped the stone into place on the board. Ilya's amber eyes flicked to the board, then narrowed. She said nothing, her fox ears twitching ever so slightly. The red fabric of her shirt shifted as she leaned closer, her sharp teeth showing in a mischievous smile. You're terrible at this, Ilya said, her tail curling around her waist. What do you mean? I'm just, Kira began. Ilya's hand darted out, lifting Kira's sleeve. A cascade of stones clattered to the ground. Ilya grabbed the stone Kira had just placed, gave her an exasperated look, then tossed it at her with a flick of her wrist. The stone bounced harmlessly off Kira's shoulder. Caught, Kira burst out laughing and rolled onto her back, the grass tickling her arms. You're too serious about this game. Ilya's pout deepened as she crossed her arms, but her tail betrayed her, twitching behind her back. The edges of her mouth started to turn upward. A soft chuckle slipped out, and soon, the two girls were laughing together, their laughter mingling with the sounds of nature. Playing with monsters again, Kira. The sharp voice pierced the air, cutting through their moment like a blade. Kira's laughter died. She sat up quickly, her hat sliding askew. Ilya's ears flattened, her smile vanishing. The source of the voice came into view. A hunched old woman, broom in hand, her steps swift despite her age. Get away from here, you little fox. The woman barked, waving the broom threateningly at Ilya. Go back to where you belong. Ilya scrambled to her feet, her tail coiling defensively. Her gaze darted to Kira, hesitation flashing in her eyes. Kira reached out instinctively, but Ilya had already turned, bounding off into the trees with the grace of her kind. Wait, Ilya, Kira's protest was cut short as the old woman's broom jabbed in her direction. You should be ashamed, Kira Lorne, the woman scolded, her voice bristling with disdain. Frolicking with beasts as if they're your equals. What would your grandmother say? Kira's stomach sank. She stood, brushing dirt off her tunic, and glanced after Ilya's retreating form, now just a blur disappearing into the forest. Sadness weighed on her chest, but there was no time to linger. Speaking of your grandmother, the woman said, grabbing Kira's arm with a firm grip, let's see what she thinks of this. The old woman's knobby fingers clutched her wrist, dragging her back toward the village. Kira didn't resist. She looked over her shoulder one last time, hoping to catch a glimpse of Ilya. The forest was silent now, save for the rustling of leaves. The wooden floor creaked underfoot as Kira's grandmother hauled her through the narrow hallway, her iron grip as unyielding as her expression. The faint smell of incense lingered in the air, mixing with the faint tang of old books and the earthy scent of the house. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, painting golden streaks across the room ahead. Kira dragged her feet slightly, her boots scuffing the floor as they entered the study. It was a formal room, cold and austere, with towering bookshelves crammed with thick tomes. At the center stood a tall woman with her back to the door. She turned at their arrival, her gold-embroidered purple robe sweeping across the floor like liquid shadow. Her golden hairclip gleamed in the light, holding her tightly bound hair in place, and her piercing blue eyes fixed on Kira. Kira, her grandmother said, releasing her arm and straightening with a sniff, meet Master Theola Draylin. She'll be overseeing your lesson today. Kira brushed off her sleeve, her gaze darting between her grandmother and the teacher. I'd come to these lessons on my own, you know, if you'd let Ilya come too. Her grandmother's lips thinned into a hard line. Ilya is not your equal, Kira. You cannot befriend monsters and expect to become a proper monster slayer. She's not a monster, Kira muttered, but her grandmother ignored her. Master Theola adjusted the gold hairclip in her hair, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp. This resistance to guidance is exactly why today's lesson will be important. Perhaps seeing the true nature of demons will clarify why they must be quelled. Kira crossed her arms. What lesson? We will be performing an exorcism, Theola said matter-of-factly, her voice smooth but carrying a weight of authority. A devil has been terrorizing a nearby community, and you'll assist us in banishing it. Kira's annoyance flickered into intrigue, her shoulders relaxing. Finally, something other than boring spells. An exorcism, really? Her grandmother folded her arms, her stern gaze turning to Theola. She's too young for this. She's old enough to be apprenticed to your family's legacy, Theola countered, her tone brisk. This will be a controlled environment. She'll observe and assist, nothing more. I can handle it, Kira blurted out, excitement sparking in her voice. I'm ready. Anything's better than staring at dusty books all day. Temper your enthusiasm, child, Theola said, her eyes narrowing. This won't be a pleasant experience. Devils thrive on fear and chaos. Even witnessing their presence can leave scars. You'll need to study and prepare on the way there. Kira's excitement dimmed slightly, but the prospect of action still outweighed the warning. I can study, her grandmother sighed, her stern expression softening for the briefest moment. You must do exactly as Theola instructs. No impulsiveness, Kira. Got it, Kira said quickly, brushing past her grandmother toward Theola. She didn't look back, but she could feel the weight of her grandmother's disapproving gaze. Theola turned, her robe swishing softly as she walked toward the door. Let's not waste time. The car is waiting. Kira followed, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and anticipation. The weight of her grandmother's words and Theola's caution lingered, but the thought of finally doing something real drowned out the rest. Action. The hover car hummed quietly as it glided down the deserted street, its sleek metal shell gleaming in the weak sunlight filtering through gray clouds. Rows of houses stretched out on either side, their windows boarded up or shattered, doors hanging off hinges. Cracks spider-webbed across walls, and the faint smell of charred wood lingered in the air. The silence was thick, broken only by the low whine of the hover car's engine and the occasional creak of a swinging gate. Kira pressed her forehead against the window, her breath fogging up the glass. Her stomach churned, not from fear, but from the unnatural stillness. Her fingers tapped against the edge of her seat, itching for action. The houses bore the marks of desperation. Clawed walls, splintered beams, and crude sigils hastily scrawled in chalk near doorways. Theola guided the car to a stop in front of a cluster of people, their faces tense and drawn. Kira spotted beast folk among them, beastmen with ears, tails, or fur that marked their lineage, but they stood apart from the humans, as if an invisible barrier separated the groups. As Theola stepped out, her robes trailing behind her, Kira followed, her boots crunching on gravel. The teacher moved swiftly to the humans, ignoring the beast folk entirely. Kira glanced at them, noticing their nervous glances and flicking tails. Do you know anything about the demon? Theola asked a haggard woman with dirt-streaked cheeks. The woman shook her head, clutching a child close. One by one, Theola questioned the humans. The responses were the same: shrugs, apologies, murmurs of ignorance. Kira's frustration built with every passing moment. She glanced at the beast folk, their expressions wary but watchful. Finally, a tall man stepped forward, his panther ears flicking toward her. His green eyes fixed on Kira as he spoke. Are you interested in hearing what we know? Or is your teacher too proud to ask us? Kira blinked, surprised by his directness. She nodded, stepping closer. What do you know? The panther man crossed his arms, his voice low and measured. The demon doesn't attack humans. It's targeting beast folk, only us. That's really helpful, Kira said, her stomach tightening with irritation. She glanced at Theola, who was still questioning the humans. She should have asked you first. Theola turned sharply at Kira's words, her gaze narrowing. What is it? Kira gestured toward the panther man. He says the demon's only attacking beast folk. Theola's lips thinned as she approached, her eyes sharp. If you're withholding anything, I'll make sure you regret it, she said coldly, towering over the panther man. Kira winced. That's not, she doesn't mean, she sighed, shaking her head. I'm sorry about her. Do you know where the demon is coming from? The panther man frowned but answered. The sewers. It crawls out of the manholes at night. Theola turned on her heel without another word, heading toward the nearest manhole. Kira lingered for a moment, looking up at the panther man. Sorry. Again. She offered a faint smile before following her teacher. Dash dash dash. The sewer's stench hit Kira like a physical blow. She gagged, covering her nose with her sleeve as she climbed down the rusted ladder. Theola descended gracefully, her robes unblemished by the grime. Stay vigilant, Theola said, her voice calm but firm. The darkness pressed around them, the faint glow of Theola's staff casting long shadows on the slick walls. The air was thick with dampness and rot, each breath a challenge. A faint pulse of energy brushed against Kira's senses, like the distant echo of a scream. Do you feel that? She whispered. Theola nodded, her expression hardening. It's close. They moved cautiously through the narrow tunnels, the spiritual pressure growing stronger with every step. Finally, they stopped in a wider chamber, the walls slick with moisture. Theola began tracing runes in the air, her staff glowing brighter as she chanted the exorcism ritual. A low growl reverberated through the space, and Kira's heart leapt. From the shadows, a hunched figure emerged, its limbs gnarled and its eyes burning red. The demon let out a guttural snarl, lunging toward them. Theola's magic lashed out, striking the creature and sending it crashing into the wall. With a flick of her wrist, she summoned another burst of energy, obliterating it. Pathetic, she said, her voice tinged with smugness. Kira barely had time to breathe before the chamber erupted with movement. Dozens of similar demons clawed their way out of the walls and floor, their shrieks filling the air. Kira stumbled back, her pulse racing. There's so many. Focus. Theola snapped, stepping in front of her. Her staff blazed with light as she summoned barriers to protect them. Don't let them overwhelm you. The two fought side by side, Kira's magic crackling as she sent bolts of energy into the horde. The demons were relentless, their sheer numbers pressing against the barriers. Theola's spells faltered as exhaustion set in, and one demon's claws raked across her arm. Teacher, Kira shouted, rushing to her side. She raised her hands, summoning a shield as the demon surged forward. Her chest heaved with effort, but she stood her ground. A deep, rasping voice echoed through the chamber. You protect them. The demons parted, revealing a larger figure, Zareth, his form shrouded in shadows. His glowing eyes fixed on Kira. Humans protecting half monsters. Betraying your own kind. Kira's hands trembled, but her gaze hardened. You're wrong. They're not monsters. You're the one attacking without a reason. Zareth chuckled darkly. Beastmen pollute your blood. Humanity's purity must be preserved. The words struck a nerve. Kira thought of Ilya, her bright eyes, her laughter, her fierce loyalty. The thought of someone calling her a monster sent a wave of rage through her. Energy built in her hands, hotter and brighter than before. You don't know anything about humanity, Kira said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Hatred like yours doesn't belong to demons. It's something you learned from humans. With a shout, she unleashed a blinding bolt of light, the energy tearing through Zareth. His form disintegrated, and the remaining demons dissolved with him, their screams fading into silence. Dash dash dash. The distant wail of an ambulance filled the air as Kira stood outside the manhole, her teacher lying on a stretcher nearby. Theola's face was pale, her breathing shallow, but the medics assured Kira she'd recover. Kira stared at the ground, her thoughts churning. A light touch on her head made her look up. The Panther Man stood beside her, his green eyes kind. You did well, he said softly. Kira managed a weak smile. Evil isn't native to demons, she murmured. It's something they adapt to, something they learn from us. Her gaze drifted to the ambulance as it pulled away. She couldn't shake the question clawing at her mind. How many demons had they created through their own hatred?